Deuteronomy chapter 19. As we recall, this is at the very end of Moses' tenure in leading the children of Israel. He's been doing this for about 40 years. He's 120. They have threatened to kill him multiple times. The generation that he had led right up to the edge of Canaan, 38 something years ago, failed to go in, and so now they went back in the wilderness. They wandered for many, many years. They're all dead. And so he's given this second telling of the law to their now grown children, and telling them what they are supposed to do when they go into Canaan. So they have conquered half of it. I'll pull up a different map. So this is on the eastern side of the Jordan River. They have already conquered all this green area, and it's going to be split between the tribe of Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh in the north. So they're camped roughly here, somewhere just east of the Jordan River, and they're going to cross over after Moses is dead, just within a couple weeks here, and they're going to mourn him 30 days. And then Joshua's going to lead them in, and the first place they're going to conquer will be that city of Jericho, which will be just razed to the ground. So that's where we're at. We've conquered over here on the east side, and so we're about ready to go in. So Moses is giving these final instructions. So that's where we're going to pick up. In verse 1, "When the Lord thy God hath cut off the nations, whose land the Lord thy God giveth thee, and thou succeedest them, and dwellest in their cities and in their houses, thou shalt separate 3 cities for thee in the midst of thy land, which the Lord thy God giveth thee to possess." All right. So this is a future event, right? They haven't gone in and conquered all this yet. So it's saying, here's something you must do when you've done this conquering, right? The Lord's given it to you. He's not only giving you the land, he's going to give it to you in their cities and into your houses. And this is strange, right? Typically when you go in and you're fighting people, cities and houses are, destroyed. And then you got to rebuild. Well, the way God's going to arrange this battle with Joshua leading them in, these enemies are going to come out, they're going to lose, and they're going to be able to basically walk into these cities and have fully furnished dwellings, fully, stocked barns and vineyards and everything. So he's laying it out, opening the red carpet. But there's some things you need to do when you do that. So once that's happened, he says, you're going to separate 3 cities in the midst of their land, which the Lord thy God giveth thee. All right, so you're going to pick 3 just to not hide the ball. We've already done this on the east side, given 3 cities, Bezer, Ramoth, and Golan, also called Ramoth Gilead, because this region right here is Gilead. So whenever you've got cities with the same name, it'll tell you either the tribe or the region around it, so you can zoom in. These have already been separated for this purpose. We'll talk about the purpose in a minute. And so you're going to have to separate 3 more. All right. Thou shalt prepare thee a way. All right, when you read a way in the Bible, that's referring to a road, a path. So not only are you responsible for designating these 3 cities, you are going to have to build some form of clear road system so that you can get to them. And divide the coast of thy land, which the Lord thy God giveth thee to inherit, into 3 parts, that every slayer may flee thither. All right, so not to hide the ball. We're talking about cities of refuge. This is where someone can flee to in the event they have accidentally murdered somebody and not die. And so your instructions here, you take the land, you divide it in 3, whop, whop, make thirds, and you put 1 in the south, in the central, and in the north. And we've already done that over here on the eastern side. So let me go back to my other map, and I got some annotations here. You got your 3 cities. I don't know how well you can see it, but this is a topo map. There's a mountain chain right here. None of these cities are up in the top of a mountain. You know what's really hard to do when you're running away from somebody? Climb a mountain. So, you know what else is hard to do? Cross rivers. So you've got down here in the southern portion, in a plain, so there's passage through 1 city, Bezer. Up here in the central portion, on a plain, not up in the mountain, in between these 2 rivers. So if you kill somebody in here, you're running downhill, at least mostly, and you're not having to cross the river or climb the mountains in general, to get to it. Same thing for Golan. So you're up here in this pasture land and on the north side of the river. So your natural geographic hindrances have been mitigated by your location. And then also they're responsible for building roads. So these are cities that have already been designated. What we're looking at today is, all right, you got to do this again when you're on the other side. Now, Kadesh, Shechem, and Hebron will eventually be named these cities. It hasn't happened yet, right? They don't know where these are going to be. They haven't gone in, they haven't conquered. So we're talking future event. But you can see you've got one in the south, one in the central, and one in the north. So why in the world would you want a slayer to be able to flee to a city? Right? Well, this is a very narrow definition of slayer. We're not just talking about, you've murdered somebody and now you got to get out of jail free card. Very narrow situation. This is the case of the slayer. Sorry, click on it so you can see. This is the case of the slayer, which shall flee thither to these cities, that he may live. Whoso killeth his neighbor ignorantly, whom he hated not in time past. All right, so there's a death, but it wasn't premeditated. It wasn't based on anger or jealousy, spite, whatever it is. It's not something where he was contemplating doing this before. In the modern day criminal law system, they have a division where you've got to talk about what is the act that happened and what is the mental state. All right, did you have the intent to kill, and did someone actually die? If you can't prove both of those, then you can't prove the crime of murder. If you have someone dying and they didn't mean to happen, then maybe you have a different cause of action called manslaughter, or different statutes. Their states have different names. But the idea is that it's an accidental death. Someone's still dead, but that wasn't what you were intending beforehand. So that's the idea here with you didn't hate him in time past. This is not somebody, man, this guy is a jerk and I'm going to get him. I'm going to make it look like an accident. But so this is a very fact-specific question. This would be something that would have to be investigated. So, an example: as when a man goeth into the wood with his neighbor to hew wood. All right, we need wood. We're going to firewood. We're going to go chop wood together. His hand fetcheth a stroke with an axe to cut the tree. So I am in mid-stroke, and the head of the axe slippeth from the helve. That's the handle. And lighteth upon its neighbor. So you're mid-swing, the axe head flies off, it goes across, and it buries itself in your neighbor's skull. You did not intend him to die. Your goal was to chop wood. It was an accident. Well, what do? You flee. You start running right then, and you get from whichever's closest to one of these cities, and if you get there and live. The family members of the dead guy have the right, because their family member is dead, to chase after you. And if they chase you and kill you, they're justified in taking vengeance, okay? Now, they may not have all the facts, right? They just know their family member is dead. They may not know this was an accident. And so there's this idea about this avenger of blood. That's the family member. He's pursuing the slayer. That's the one who's accidentally killed somebody, while his heart is hot, all right? So folks get a little passionate when family members die. And so you're talking about, while this emotional burst is going on and they're just reacting, he says you need to have a place for him to flee, lest that guy who's full of passion chasing after him overtakes him, because the way is long. So if you chose a poor spot for your city and you've got massive gaps where it's not reasonable for him to flee to, then these slayers, these accidental slayers of men will die. And God's saying here is, whereas he was not worthy of death, all right? An accidental death is not the same as an intentional murder. He says he wasn't worthy of death. What's the difference? Inasmuch as he hated him not in time past. That motivation matters. So God is providing a safe harbor for these guys, for someone who's accidentally killed them. So you as Israelites, Moses speaking to them now, when you go in, you must designate these cities. You got to have a road that connects them so that someone can know where to go, run quickly, probably even need to have it marked, and so that they can, not die for something they weren't worthy of their death. So wherefore I command thee, saying, thou shalt separate 3 cities unto thee. Now, he's also going to give a future instruction. Right? So if the Lord thy God enlarge thy coast, as he has sworn unto thy fathers, and give thee all the land which he's promised unto thy fathers, and if thou shalt keep all these commandments to do them, which I command thee this day, to love the Lord thy God, to walk in his ways, then thou shalt add 3 cities more for thee besides these 3. Okay, so this is an additional expansion, right? So you can only run so far, right? And so if the nation of Israel enlarges even more, because God had promised him a pretty large chunk of area, if that conquering happens, then you need to add in some more cities to make sure that the path is still reasonable. Now, as far as I know, that never occurred, right? We have the original 6 that were designated, and then there was never, it's not recorded in Scripture to my knowledge. You can check me on that. The expansion never occurring, but Moses is providing for it. Now, what's conditional on that is that as with most of this covenant, their obedience was a prerequisite for God doing certain things. Right? You obeyed, he would bless the rain in the right time, and have them free from plagues and pestilence, all these really good things if they obeyed. Well, what we read is Israel's history is that they didn't, and so they never really received that full benefit of what he had promised them because they weren't obeying. They didn't follow him faithfully, and they very quickly got into idolatry. All right, so you've got these cities and the potential for 3 more. Why? That innocent blood be not shed in the land. Now, we're not talking about the accidental dead neighbor. That's not the innocent blood. We're talking about the manslayer, the accidental murderer. Murderer is probably not the best term, that's why I use the word slayer. Guy who caused someone else's death, saying he wasn't worthy of death. And so when those family members catch up to him and kill him, God is saying that that's an innocent blood, and that's not good. Lord's given you this land, and the innocent are not to be shed. Their blood is not to be shed here. You get later into the kings when you got Manasseh. That was one of the indictments against him, was he was such a wicked king. It said that the blood of the innocents ran through the streets. All right. So even in this scenario, God wants them to not shed innocent blood. So he's given them this means of provision. So don't shed innocent blood in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance. And so blood be upon thee, right? There's a consequence when innocent blood is shed. And so he's showing them what they need to do to avoid that. Now, don't take it beyond what it's intended. But if any man hate his neighbor and lie in wait, all right, lie in wait means you're premeditated, right? He's going out to chop his wood and you're hiding behind the tree, like Wile E. Coyote or something, you're ready to drop the anvil. It's premeditated and rises up against him and kills him, smite him mortally that he die, and fleeth unto the city doesn't do you any good. Okay, what are they going to have to do? Well, the elders of his city, this is the murderer's city, they're going to go to that city of refuge, and they are going to get him. And they are going to deliver him into the family members who have the right to slay him, because he was a murderer here. This was intentional, and he would be put to death. So they would have to, the elders of his city would have to know that he intended to kill him. So this would be an investigation. They go and they get him, and then they have a determination that he is not eligible to remain in the city of refuge. And it doesn't say it in this chapter, but elsewhere we learn that how long do you have to stay in there? Until whoever the current high priest is dies. So we may be talking months, we may be talking years, we may be talking decades. I don't know, but it's like this kind of like a house arrest, but you're within a city. All right, you're confined. It's a banishment. You can't go home, but you're also safe. So there's a trade-off. There's no. It's not that there's no consequence for someone dying, but it's not your life, which is the general rule for capital crimes. That and going all the way back to Noah, that if you've killed somebody at your hand, your life would be required or forfeited. And so here, when we're talking about an actual murder, that's what happens. If you flee to the city as a murderer, sorry, buddy, it doesn't do you any good. You're going to be delivered out, and you're going to face the consequences for that murder. Now, Moses here is speaking, thine eye shall not pity him. We're talking about a murderer, one who intended to kill him. You cannot let him off the hook. You cannot let him stay there, right? This is the reality of that. Not only do you have to go after him and pull him out, you must follow through with the punishment. Otherwise, the blood of that innocent who he's murdered is broader upon the nation because they didn't do what they were supposed to do. God gave them, here's the system for criminal justice, of God's justice for dealing with this kind of crime. You have to follow through with it. And if you don't, instead of it just being that guy who's guilty, now the entire nation is culpable. Okay? So, put away the innocent blood, that it may go well with you. Whenever you see expressions like that, it may go well with you, what's implied there is also the reality or threat that if you don't, it will not go well with thee, right? And there's a lot of safety for them in obedience, and disobedience, that was the opposite. Okay, so that's the Avengers of Blood. That's the Cities of Refuge. Only applies to those who truly accidentally determine the death. They've got to figure out what the reality was, and then if it doesn't apply, then actual murderer, he would be subject to death. So kind of randomly, but we're just tossed in here in this chapter dealing with laws and disputes. There's also the instruction, "Thou shalt not remove thy neighbor's landmark." All right, so there's a random little stone, right? Sometimes you use something like this as a property marker. If you wanted to expand your property by 100 feet, what do you do? Pick that thing up and carry it over. This is frequently mentioned in Scripture, particularly in connection with not abusing the property rights of widows and orphans, the ones who are least likely to be able to fight against you. This has a matter of doing honesty, not being deceitful. So you don't do it. Thou shalt not remove thy neighbor's landmark, which they of old time have set in thine inheritance, which thou shalt inherit in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee to possess it. All right. You got an authority statement there. God speaking, saying, I gave you this land. It's been divided up for inheritance. You don't get to cheat each other. All right? I gave it to you. Don't try to take advantage. Now, they haven't actually gone in the land. There's no landmarks yet. So we're talking about future events, talking about old landmarks that haven't been placed yet. So when this is all divided out, how are you going to govern yourself? You're going to not be deceitful in trying to take a larger portion of the land. Now, particularly in the way God's setting up the passing of land, this is very important because an individual man did not have the right to sell his land permanently. Okay, because that would be affecting your children and grandchildren and all of their inheritance rights. So all you had to do was the right to lease it to someone else for a max of 50 years. Remember that thing called the Year of Jubilee? That's when all of those leases, everything that has been done is now back to zero. So one generation cannot, divest, I'm trying to think of simpler words, mess up the inheritance of the future ones. They only have the right to use it for a time. So it's more like a life estate in modern times, where you can use it however you want it for your life, but you cannot permanently sell it. So if you have someone who is cheating their neighbor here, you're cheating not only your neighbor, their grandkids, just generations down. And so big long-term consequences. It's not like it's just going to be, all right, well, the next person who buys it and they do a survey and they discover it. So honesty, very much important. All right. Next topic. One witness shall not rise up against a man for any iniquity or for any sin, in any sin that he sinneth. At the mouth of two witnesses or at the mouth of three witnesses shall the matter be established. All right. General principle here, you got to have at least two witnesses for someone to be punished, to be condemned for an action. You can't have just one guy saying, yes, he did this. I saw him, premeditated murder, one guy. Now, why does it use the language rise up against him? Well, if you were an eyewitness, you actually had to participate in the punishment, right? We're making this criminal decision based on your witness. And so if there is a stoning that has to be taking place, you as a witness got a chunk of stone. And so this idea of rising up against them is that if you just have one, that's insufficient, right? You need at least two, preferably three, right? So that's your general rule. One's not enough, got to have at least two or three. So if you've got two or three that are saying the same line story, then you've got this kind of conspiracy and higher level of wrongdoing than just one person. Makes it a little bit harder. I'm not saying it's impossible. There's numerous examples in Scripture where you had false witnesses, collectively, bearing false witness, lying about somebody. Naboth, I believe that was his name. Maybe not. There was a guy who, one of the kings, Ahab, wanted his field or his vineyard. He wanted to make it an herb garden. And the guy said, no, that's my inheritance. I can't sell it, right? It's not something he has the right to. Didn't want to lease it either. And the king was upset. And so his wife, Jezebel, says, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. And so she told the masters of a city, saying, you'll have a great feast, and you invite that guy, I'm pretty sure his name's Naboth, to be up on the center podium, and I want you to pay some lower class fellows to stand up and lie and say that he's blasphemed against God. Well, that's a capital offense. And so you got these 2 or 3 guys who stand up, say that against him, publicly charge him. The whole town's in uproar. They go out and kill him, and the king gets his vineyard, whatever it was. Now, there's a prophet who comes and later tells Ahab that you're going to die, and the dogs are going to lick your blood at the same spot from that guy's field. And so the Lord took care of it. But that was an example of where you had at least 2 or 3 witnesses in cahoots bearing false witness, and then somebody dying about it. Now, what is the deterrent from somebody bearing false witness? If a false witness rise up against any man to testify against him, that which is wrong, then both the men between whom the controversy is shall stand before the Lord, before the priest and the judges which shall be in those days, and the judges shall make diligent inquisition. And behold, if the witness be false, and hath testified falsely against his brother, then you shall do unto him as he thought to have done unto his brother. So shalt thou put the evil away from you. All right. If you lie in court today, you may be held in contempt of court. You may be a perjury. There may be a fine. You may go to jail. But if you're in a murder case and you're saying he done it and he didn't do it, you're not subject to the death penalty. That's what this standard is. Whatever you're witnessing against somebody, trying to pin it on them, whatever the punishment that they're to receive under that crime, that's what you receive for lying about it. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to cause harm to your neighbor and using the state or the civil government as the actor to inflict that harm. And so you are going to receive, if they determine that you're lying, that on yourself. Right? So if you've got this conflict, what do? You go before the priests and the judges. There's various ones there. And it shall be in those days, right? You see, we're talking future tense. Right? You have priests scattered throughout the nation. You're going to have the priest there where the Lord's going to declare his name, first at Shiloh and then Jerusalem. There's going to be various judges. And you're going to figure out, well, who's right? Who's in, and that's this, the judges shall make diligent inquisition, right? You can't just kind of half listen and then just, you've got to judge righteously and determine, you've got these 2 who are saying opposite things, who's right. Determine who's right and who's, in the wrong. And so if they determine that one of the witnesses is lying, then they must render unto him that same punishment. So shalt thou put the evil away from you. The person who's bearing that false witness, that's one of the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not bear false witness. If you read over in Proverbs, it says that's one of the things the Lord hates. That's a pretty strong word. It's an abomination, one who bears false witness against his brother. It says, so you got to put that evil away from you, right? You born this with false witness, saying, he did something, and for that, the punishment is his hand is going to be chopped off. Well, the witness's hand would be chopped off. That's when we get into this expression of that eye shall not pity, life shall go for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. In this context, we are literally talking about what is the damage that your false testimony would have received on this innocent person. That is what the punishment the judge or the priest determines is against you as the false doer. So this eye for an eye, it makes the whole world blind thing. We're not talking about you taking personal vengeance on somebody who's wronged you. In this context, we're talking about a wrongdoer receiving the harm that he was trying to inflict on someone else. That's a pretty good deterrent effect, right? And in fact, that's what verse 20 says. And those which remain, right? Because if it was a capital crime, you're not alive anymore, right? That false witness is now dead. But everyone in the community is like, we hear about this, and we fear, and shall henceforth commit no more any such evil among you, right? There's limits, right? If I were to try that same trick, it may cost me my life because, one, God set the standard, and the people here are willing to follow through on what God said. So, again, this is very specific, and this is not Moses's creativity. This is him relaying what God has set up. God is the legislator of Israel, right? This country that hadn't existed before this, went from one guy and his, 12 sons, 70 people there in Egypt. Now it's ballooned up to this massive, group of people of 600,000 men. And now they're going to go in and they're going to, have a country. Well, they're not going to go and have a, continental Congress and elect, designators and try and figure out how we're going to run this whole thing. God's telling them, here's how you run it. There are the laws. Here's criminal law. Here's property law. Here's civil law. Here's how you listen to the judges. Here are the punishments. And so he's laying it all out. But the charge for them is they've got to go through and actually heed it and obey it. And we know from reading through the rest of the histories that they don't. But that's Deuteronomy chapter 19.